Nowadays, most mobile phones are starting to look more and more like cameras, and we use the cameras a lot. And this is no exception here. Very camera-centric, the Nubia Z50S Pro. So when you take a look at the back of it, it looks more like a camera, doesn't it? And it's got a 35mm main camera, 50 megapixels with optical image stabilization, 50 megapixel ultra-wide, and then a zoom camera which is 8 megapixels. It's a phone that is quite cheap too for the spec on offer. I wouldn't say very cheap, but it's just over 600 euros, yet you get top of the line specs here. Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, 12 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of UFS 4.0 storage. It's got 80-watt fast charging and a flat AMOLED screen that's 120 Hertz. The size is 6.78 inches. So I'll let you know if this phone is worth that price tag. Is it a phone you should consider? In the box here we'll find we get our Type-C to Type-C cable in red. We've got an 80-watt charger, so great to see that is included, unlike other manufacturers that are dropping that. We have some paperwork here that is in Chinese, being a Chinese phone, SIM tray tool, and this hard clear case here that has some silver around the outside. So that simply just clips in over the phone like so, and it still retains that camera look of the Z50S Pro. And if you are wondering where I bought this model, well, I got it from Trading Shenzhen. I buy a lot of phones from them, so it's an import model here. You can only get it in China, and there is going to be, I believe, no global version of this at all. Now, there are a lot of things about this phone I really do like, and it's got, I think, a fantastic build quality, and I love the fact that the screen is flat here. So it is 6.78 inches. That's slightly more than the iPhone 14 Pro Max that I do have right here, and you can see they are very similar looking phones. The design of them, the frame, how it is squared off, it's almost like they decided to copy a little bit Apple with the design of it, but that's really as far as it goes, just with the frame and having the flat screen, which I'm all for, which does look good. And you see when you look down here at the bottom of it, a little bit similar there, but of course then we've got Lightning connector, Type-C, the antenna lines, and that's our SIM tray there that takes 2 nano SIMs. Now the thickness of this phone is 8.6, so it is not the thinnest phone out there, and it does weigh 228 grams, so it's reasonably heavy, but still not quite as heavy as that of an iPhone 14 Pro Max. A really nice build, very good frame around it, and we've got this dedicated switch here to get into the camera mode, which is also fantastic. Really do like that. And we have metal buttons here. So the antenna lines, the frame, this is made out of a matte metal here, the finish of it. So it picks up fingerprints and smudges, and you can see that the camera does protrude a little bit, but this is where the phone, I think, looks really good. Something a bit different, because now it looks exactly like you're holding a camera. Well, almost, okay? It's got definite camera vibes to it, camera DNA. And interesting enough that Nubia decided to go with a 50 megapixel camera. It's f1.6, so good, nice and bright, but 35 millimeters. Okay, we don't normally see that, so 35 millimeter equivalent here in this. It's got face detection, autofocus, and optical image stabilization. We do have then a zoom camera that is only 8 megapixels. That's 80 millimeter equivalent f2.4. and also does have optical image stabilization. And then an ultra-wide, which is 50 megapixels. This does have autofocus, so it can be used for macro shots. And that's f2.0, which is rather bright for an ultra-wide. And I like the way it looks. It's just different, and they're apparently going to be making a 1-inch version of this phone too, with a 1-inch sensor that has a even larger camera bulge here that protrudes. It protrudes quite a bit, but it's not too offensive. It's not too big there, I don't think, there. And you can see there's a flash too in the correct position, making it almost look like a Xeon flash. So a great looking phone. I like the fact that it's different. Now this back here, this has a texture to it, and we've got a bit of a texture to this. And it does look really good. Doesn't tend to pick up fingerprints either. Then along the top, we have 2 loudspeakers, so stereo loudspeakers, secondary microphone, IR transmitter. Down the bottom, I showed you this before, but this Type-C port, the good news is it does support video out. Now, it does not have a desktop mode, but it's just clone display. Still great to see this. So we have a 16 megapixel camera here in the cutout, and as I mentioned, the display is completely flat, and I really do like this. Now, maximum brightness, their claim is 1200 nits. I've not actually been able to measure that at all. I'm getting close to 1000, so it's like 980 or so. Perhaps I need to be in direct sunlight to trigger it. I even did try that, but I couldn't really get that result. But 1200 nits, as far as I can tell, it is looking very, very bright when out in direct sunlight. As you can see now that you're able to make out the screen, you can send messages, WhatsApp, whatever your use there in the sun won't really be hindered too much because it's a very bright screen. So the resolution of it is 1260 by 2800, and it is, the typical standard 20 by 9 aspect ratio. You can see when I swipe there to the left that I've got all these cards that are in Chinese. You can clean this up or you can disable it, and I do have the apps drawer. I prefer it this way, but you can not use that if you don't want it. And you've got your widgets on the screen and whatnot too as well. So the screen looks sharp. It's got 452 ppi. It's a very nice screen, really bright. And I'll just show you some of the settings we do have for this display here. Now, touch accuracy is normally good. That's my fault there because I'm looking at my monitor before I actually look at the screen, which would help if I did that. So you've got your typical options here that you can set the refresh rate. 90 Hertz is there too, so we've got that perfect sweet spot. I'm really happy about that. I'm going to force it onto 120. That's what I was using before. I don't know why I put it back onto auto. And you do, of course, have an ambient light sensor. Night mode, you can tweak the colors. You'll find them under here, which is just under the color mode. Okay, so you can set the white balance and adjust all of that. So pretty happy with all the options. Overall, it's a very nice display, definite flagship level. Really do love it. Mostly because it's flat too. I just don't really like curved screens that much. What about you? Do you like curved screens or you prefer flat? Let me know in the comments. So it does have myOS 13 that it's running. That's based off Android 13. And yeah, myOS is similar to iOS, isn't it? So Apps Drawer is what I've got enabled. I've found that the multitasking is very fluid. Touch response does seem to be very good. And all up, I haven't really had any problems with the performance. Now, the ROM, it takes a little while to get used to. There's quite a bit of customization too in there. So if you jump in, you can go into just a few areas like the personalized settings. There's a lot that you can tweak and change, all sorts of things, down to even the animation of the fingerprint. And of course, you've got options for the always on display, which I do have enabled. So the ROM, it has its little quirks in there and things that are more personal. I won't comment too much on that, but I think it's functional, it's fine, it's fast, it is fluid, and there are a lot of different options in here. So you've got power saving modes, turbocharge, charge separation. This is a good option to have if you intend to game a lot. So it'll be powering just from the charge of the phone and not touching the battery. That helps reduce the heat. This is a feature we've seen before with some gaming phones, and it's good just for the longevity of your battery, but also just to cut back on thermal throttling. Now, if you do jump into our About phone here, you can see it's myOS. There is something here called RAM capacity. Now, I don't like this terminology calling it extended RAM because it's not really, as everyone knows. This is virtual RAM, it's caching. Now you can enable it, it's not on by default, and if you do so, it's meant to make the phone feel a little bit more snappy, a little bit more quicker. But really, I've had no problems with the performance. Now you will see this, as I showed you before, there's like a little bit of Chinese in here with the cards on that side if you swipe to the left, but all up, very good performance, really fast, does not miss a beat, 120 Hertz, 120 frames per second the UI is running at. So what about 5G? No, I do not have it. I'm stuck here on 4G. Unfortunately, 5G I just can't seem to get, not where I am at the moment. 4G is working fine, so it's not as bad as the issues I had with the Xiaomi Mix Fold 3. I do wish I had 5G, but I can live without it. So just bear that in mind. Check the 5G and 4G bands that you are going to have coverage with your carrier. Good news if you're someone that likes Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, Disney Plus, all of the streaming services do run at full HD. It does support a Widevine Level 1 cert. And note that we do have HDR10 support here, and yes, 90 Hz refresh rate. You can select that through the settings, which is great. It's that sweet spot between fluidity and battery savings. And this is the latest update that I have at the time of this video. So I'm reviewing it with this firmware. Good to see that Nubia is pushing out fixes, although it's all in Chinese. There's some bug fixes there just to help improve things. So they are on top of it. I've encountered no bugs apart from there is a big issue that I have that I can't run 3D Mark's wildlife stress test. It gets that hot that it powers itself off, or it just powers itself off due to some sort of software glitch. Not sure why that is. So camera API to support here is level 3. So that means we've got open camera support. Your Gcam ports, look for those, and any other software that needs full access to the cameras, all of them, it does have it. So that's good to see that Nubia has done that. And what about our safety net? Yes, it does pass There's NFC on board too with this model. Internal storage, UFS 4.0 is very quick. You can see here, look, that is basically PCIe 3.0 SSD speeds, really fast, impressive random write speeds. So installation of files is very quick, no problems at all. And here is our Antutu score. This is the latest version, so it's getting a very solid score here. For the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, maximum clock is that 3.36 gigahertz with this, so it's a very fast chipset, and I do like it. It runs relatively cool. It's a lot faster than the Gen 1. And battery charge time, so it took here 35 minutes to fully charge it. Don't read this score here because it reset for some reason. And just to point out that when you first get it, there are a few little bloatware applications. I've already removed most of the Chinese stuff. The good thing is Nubia lets us pretty much uninstall most of it, so it won't be too much of an issue there when you're using it, but you still will see a few things that will pop up in Chinese now and then when it comes to like notifications from a few certain apps, so just mute them. Battery runtime, this is at 120 Hertz, about 7 hours is what you can expect out of this, so that's pretty much on par with other flagships. 7, you could squeeze it out to maybe 7.5. Now, if you use 90 Hertz or 60, look then to about 8.5 hours, which is quite a bit better, so you can extend it out. And that is it when it comes to just the benchmarks and tests that I have done. Unfortunately, no 3D Mark stress test, throttling test, because it would just simply power itself off completely, which is quite a major issue. I hope they can fix that bug. As I mentioned before, we've got Netflix in Full HD, and I've double checked that it is working in Full HD here, but it's not supporting HDR. That is the only thing here with it. Now, of course, you can run that in a little window. The app allows us to do that. And over to those speakers now. So we have the dual loudspeakers, top and bottom. They have a reasonable amount of bass to them. The mid treble is okay. The volume's all right as well. I would give them about a 7. Yeah, a 7 out of 10 rating for loudspeakers. So here is a sample of them with some no copyright songs here at 100% volume. So this one is very obvious. Gaming performance, it is, yes, very good. So Genshin Impact, highest possible settings, 60 frames per second. It starts out really well. You get occasional frame dips when you move into new areas or you're fighting a lot of different enemies, but it's very good, the performance here, very solid, and a consistent frame rate too. My only concern is that issue that I showed you with 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme stress test, that after about 20 minutes of really pushing it, well, it was only 3 minutes with that test, that it powered itself off. For gaming, so far with the games I've been testing out, it hasn't done this, but I do believe there is a possibility that if it got too hot, it would simply power itself off, which is a deal breaker. So Nubia need to address this bug or this thermal issue before I could truly really get behind this phone for gamers out there. So this is the default camera app. There's a lot of options and things you can do in this, and I'll just briefly go over it. So photos by default, we've got 35mm, we have our 13 and 50 and the 80. The 80 is our zoom camera, and then 170mm, that's mostly digital and it does not look very good. I'll give you a sample of that shortly when I show you the samples there. So video. Now video, we've got 4K at 120 frames per second. That is not very common to see that option there. And then we have 8K at 30 frames per second. Our night mode, which we got the camera options there, so they don't let us do the super zoom on that one, only 80mm max, which does make sense. And our portrait, this is the real strength of this camera, I feel, the portrait shots and the fact that we've got the 35mm, which is really great. So you go into the street mode, you've got a lot of different settings there for that. We have the Pro mode too, so you can see lots of options we can tweak across all of the lenses. Camera family, so that just lists some different camera modes there. So there are a few things that you can test out here with the Z50S Pro. First up is our front-facing 16-megapixel camera. We don't have any electronic image stabilization with this, and it's just 1080p only for a flagship. It really should be 4K, and we should really have that electronic image stabilization. Audio bitrate isn't the greatest either. I wish they could increase this to improve upon that audio quality. So without that stabilization, you're really going to need to use a gimbal with this front-facing camera for vlog footage. Ultra wide, we've got 4K 30, 4K 60, and with the main camera even 4K 120 frames per second, which you don't see often at all with mobile phones. So this image stabilization is very good, and the day, yeah, a little bit cloudy. We've got some storms coming. I have waited and tried to get better footage, but I'm running out of time here because the weather's only going to get worse with more storms forecast for us. So this is the 0.4 times with the 13mm. Now if I apply some zoom 1 times, it's not swapping the camera, so that's a bit disappointing. You can see digitally not good now with the ultra wide, so you want to keep it at that 0.4 times, and you need to know which camera you're going to start recording. Unfortunately, you just can't swap over on the fly to the other cameras. That is disappointing. This is now our 35mm main camera, and it does have optical image stabilization and electronic being applied. Focus I found to be good. Haven't really noticed any issues with it. Tends to lock on quick, as you can see. And that stabilization good. And when I apply some zoom, no, it's not going to go over to the zoom camera. It's going to stick with the main lens. So that is 2.4 times 2.7, sorry, digital zoom. That's now 2.4. If you go on further, it's only going to look worse. As you can see, it starts to look a bit blurry there. So you want to start out, as I mentioned just before, with the camera you plan to record on. If you need that zoom, then start using the zoom camera to record. This is the real strength of this camera, is the 35mm for portrait. So the colors look very pleasant when you zoom in. This is the 80mm, this shot here with portrait looking very good. A little bit soft, the tones there. And now with the portrait mode fully on, it's blurred the background. The stitching looks reasonably good. Skin tones a little soft, and this one of my cat hair Vera is just the plain 35mm. Some good background blur there. But something like a bright flower here, it's clipping the reds oversaturated, so some optimization needed. Again, I'm loving the background blur here. Subject is in focus, looks reasonably good, but it's struggling again with the bright colors, especially flowers. And of course, being a 35mm lens, you have less field of view. You're quite close to your subject, which some people may like, but others might not. Ultra-wide shots don't come out too bad. Do remember this was a cloudy, overcast day, but if you do crop in a little bit, you notice around the edges there is a tendency to have a bit of noise with these shots. The shot is of 35mm to start with, then I go to 80mm, and then taking it to 170mm, which is mostly digital zoom, not looking good. You can see there's quite a bit of noise to this shot, so disappointing zoom camera, I feel. 35mm lens here with the f1.6. I think the night shots do look pretty good. There's a lot of details captured. I mean, you could start to pick away at it when you start pixel peeping, but these shots I think look relatively good with good details. Overall quite pleasant, and even the selfie camera does support a night shot mode, but this one is looking a little blurry, but still better than other phones. So let me quickly recap here. I do love what I'm seeing out of the main camera. The 35mm can take some wonderful shots, especially portraits. That is, I think, the correct focal length to have for portraits. I really do personally like it. We've got the 80mm choice, now not so great, and when you do decide to use, say, 170mm, the zoom, it's mostly digital, so it doesn't look amazing. And I don't like the fact that when you start shooting, for example, 4K video with the ultra wide, you can't zoom in and swap over to the main camera or then go over to the optical zoom camera. It won't allow us to do that. You're stuck with whatever lens you choose, which is a slight annoyance. Audio bitrate with video could be improved too. It's not the greatest. And the other thing about it is that I found that problem that if you try to push it really hard with very demanding 3D graphics like a benchmark, so that was Wildlife Extreme that I tested out, 3D Mark's Wildlife Extreme, that around about the 3rd minute, it powered off completely. And that was it. You have to manually power it back on. So it triggered some sort of thermal protection, a threshold that I don't know where it's set, but maybe it's set for the battery. If it reached 50 degrees or 55 degrees, then the phone would automatically power off. And that is what happened. So that is very disappointing to see. I hope that's going to be corrected with a firmware update. So I love the flat screen. I think it's a fantastic looking phone that the back of it looks basically like a camera. I really do like this. Really stunning screen on it too, and the fact there's no curvature. The frame around the outside of it, as I showed you briefly there, kind of has a bit of an iPhone 14 Pro, iPhone 13 Pro feel to it, squared off, but you know, you could say that about any phone that has a squarish kind of frame at about the 6.7 inch size screen, which this does have. This one's 6.78 inches. So all up, is it a phone that I can recommend and say just run out and get it? If you find it for a really good price and you want the latest hardware and you're able to put up with some of the inconveniences that I talked about, and if we find out they do fix that powering off bug, yes. But if they haven't fixed that bug and you game a lot on this phone, then just word of warning, it may suddenly power off on you. Or when you're running GPS and it's in the sun, it might get too hot and just power off, which is not what you want, of course. So that you need to bear all of that in mind, factor that in, and what current price you're looking at for the phone. So it's good. It has definite potential here. And I look forward to seeing a more advanced version of this with a possible 1-inch sensor, that IMX989. Maybe they're going to be coming up with a version. It's rumored to have that. So maybe I will be back with more Nubia coverage